So today I'm here to catch you up on what I've been reading with horror and thriller books. It feels like it's been a hot minute since I've done an update, and I have a whole bunch of new releases, some good, some not so good, as well as a couple backlist titles that I really enjoyed and want to share with you all here. So if that sounds good, let's get started. First, let's talk about some thrillers, starting with Murder Road by Simone St. James. This is their newest release, and in this one we follow a couple who are going off on their honeymoon. Along the way they come across this girl, they give her a lift. She doesn't seem to be all right, and soon enough they realize that she's actually bleeding out and they have to deal with the ramifications of that. And then without getting too far into the actual plot, basically they have to go on the run. They get to find out what was happening to a degree with that girl and get pulled into something so much larger than themselves. So from the premise and the title, I went to this book expecting an action-packed thriller, and while it definitely has elements of that to a degree, I actually found this one to be a lot more relationship and character focused than I expected to be. It wasn't as thrilling or as much of a page turner as I wanted. However, I will give the author props. I have liked this author before. I've read a few of their other books and have enjoyed them, but I did find that they got a bit into a formula in the past where their books just started to really seem the same. They kind of had the setup where there was flashbacks between the past and present. There was always a journalist trying to investigate something. And so I really am glad that this one is a departure from that formula, because it was starting to feel a bit tired. Even though I generally like the author's work, it just all kind of felt the same. And so this one was different. Unfortunately, I don't think it really played to their strengths. I feel like it was weak in terms of the action-packed thriller you'd expect from a book called Murder Road. So I liked it to a degree. I think the author has some decent writing skills, but you can tell that this one left me wanting a lot more than I got from it. Next, let's talk about She's Not Sorry by Mary Kubica. This is another book that was part of my New Year, New Fears package. I think this might be the last one on the list. And so in this one, we follow an ICU nurse who's also a single mom, and she has a patient and soon realizes that there's more to this patient than meets the eye, and the story goes from there. This is one where I really enjoy the character work. I am always sympathetic to a single mom character. You have her working hard at these jobs and then trying to be a parent at the same time. I love the setup to that, and I found those aspects to be the most interesting. However, the mystery itself, I didn't find as compelling as I wanted it to be. I've read this author before. I really like their debut, but it's been many years since I've read it, so I don't know if it holds up as well today now that I've read a lot more thrillers. But this is one that had some fairly interesting character work, or at least characters that I was able to immediately like and root for along the way. But I didn't find this book as twisty and turny as I wanted it to be. It felt, again, a bit more like a contemporary fiction where it was more about this woman versus the larger story. It was certainly there, but I just wasn't as emotionally attached to it. So if you can't tell, this is another thriller that was fine, but didn't live up to my expectations. Next, we have Annie Bot by Greer. This is another new release. This is a sci-fi thriller, and I originally planned to put this into my SFF content, but once I started reading it, I realized that it was more appropriate to put here, because while it has science fiction elements, technically, it is much more of a thriller first and foremost, so I think it will appeal to those that watch these videos. So in the story, it's set in a near future where we have advanced artificial intelligence enough to allow us to have these companion robots. And so we follow this individual who works as a companion. They are owned by this individual. And so they do all the things you'd expect from a companion. They kind of clean up the house, they make food, and then they also do relations and so forth. Within the story, there's an incident that happens that spirals the plot forward. I can't remember if it's on the back of the book, so I won't spoil it. This is one where I love the premise. I adore these kind of stories. I enjoy things in the vein of the video game Detroit Becoming Human. I played that over Christmas, and I'm obsessed with artificial intelligence stories. So I love the idea of exploring what it would look like if we do advance technology to that degree and seeing all of the moral and social implications that come along with it. So in terms of a premise setup, I was really liking this start, having the conversation of, is this person intelligent, they appear to be sentient, or are they simply property, and all of those good conversations that get told over and over again. But honestly, I never get tired of having those conversations in my stories. Where the story eventually lost me, though, is after the climax at the beginning of the story, where there's an incident that propels them into this crisis of their relationship, let's call it. And from there, the story just turns into a big drama fest where they end up at one point doing couples counseling. To describe my frustration with this book is it just felt like the kind of story I don't normally read, hence why I'm not putting it into my science fiction content, because if you pick up this book looking for a book in the vein of Isaac Asimov that is going to explore robots and the laws of robotics and all of those kind of conversations, you will not get that here. If you're looking for a book all about the ins and outs of the emotional turmoil of being a robot and trying to deal with their feelings with their human counterpart and going back and forth and working through their problems through marriage counseling. If that is what you're looking for, you might love this book a lot more than I did. But if you can't tell from my tone and jokingness with this video, I do admit that I did not love where the story went. I thought it was just a little bit silly and just not for me. Again, maybe this book is for someone else. I don't mean to yuck your yum, but I can only review from my perspective, and I really thought that the premise was fantastic and the delivery of what we got was pretty weak. Next is The Silence in Her Eyes, and this is a thriller that follows a woman who has a rare neurological disease where essentially she has a disability where she cannot sense movement or notice movement. So she is not blind, she can see individuals, but she's not somehow able to perceive when they're moving around. Now, when I heard the premise of this and started having it explained to me within the book, I thought it was completely ridiculous and made up. However, I actually went on Wikipedia, and apparently it is a real thing, very rare, but the actual disease or neurological condition does exist, which I thought was interesting. I have no idea how good the representation is, how accurate the details were within this book, but it was a really interesting premise. So we start off with this young woman, and she explains how her life has developed. She had a mother who very much was taking care of her. At the beginning of the story, she has passed away, and now she is trying to cope with less supports. You follow her at the beginning, and there's possibly someone who might be going around her apartment. She thinks that someone might have broken in or opened her door. There is a neighbor that might be dealing with their own situation, and the story starts to build. In terms of a setup and premise and start, this book was very strong. I was immediately interested in it. It's relatively short, so I actually read it in a single day, and I was immediately pulled in from the grip, and then it kind of started to slow down for me. I feel like it's a book that started strong and ended a lot weaker. The ending is not per se poor, but by the time we got there, I had lost a lot of my interest in the story. I just feel like the author was trying to do too many things at once and not doing any of them in a really successful way. I still think that the book has a really interesting premise. There's kind of a series of thrillers I've read over the last while where they find really unique, rare conditions and turn them into these stories where you have kind of the question of, are they seeing things or is it part of their condition, all of that. So I think it's well played into the story, but the author just wasn't quite as precise or skilled to really pull off the story to the degree that I think it should have been done. So I liked it, didn't love it. I feel like that's becoming the theme of this video. Let's move on to something I did like. Now let's switch over to horror, starting with Midnight on Beacon Street by Emily Ruth Verona. And this is a coming-of-age story, one that is set, I believe, in the early 90s. It was one of my anticipated releases for the year. And this is very much a vintage story meant to have those callbacks to classic horror movies and books. So we follow an individual who works as a babysitter. She deals with some very severe anxiety. In order to deal with that, part of what she does is she really leans in and has become very obsessive with horror movies, because even though of course scary things happen on the screen, she finds a lot of comfort within them. We follow her as she is babysitting one night for these kids, and of course something is going wrong, and this possibly spirals into a thriller / horror book from there. This is one that I ended up really enjoying. I was really surprised to see online that it has very low ratings on Goodreads, and I'm going to try to give a bit of my experience and kind of project why that might be happening with this book. So this was not a 5-star read for me, but I believe I gave it 4 stars. I did really enjoy it. I am someone who is easily pleased by horror books that reference horror movies and get a little bit meta, where you have again the babysitter and it all leans into things that we know and the tropes we've seen over and over again, and the author is aware of those tropes and plays into it. So this book follows some great plot points there. I especially really like the treatment of anxiety, something that I don't see represented enough in books. And so I think for a lot of us, whether or not we specifically have anxiety, I find the idea of either reading horror books or watching horror movies very comforting. I understand where the character is coming from. I think it made sense to me and was well telegraphed within the pages. So I liked the setup of this book, and I generally liked the book as it went on. But for whatever reason, I found it not as suspenseful as I would have liked. I think that's where a lot of the other criticisms I saw on Goodreads come from, is simply the fact that this book is marketed as being a horror thriller, and it's awfully slow paced. There are these cutscenes, these flashbacks and forth that make sense as you get to the end of the book, but they do slow the pacing down to a degree. I never found this book thrilling, and the middle section kind of took a while for me to get into. I actually enjoyed the beginning more and eventually really liked the ending, but the middle part I kind of had to push through with the idea that I wanted to see how it ended, which ended up having an ending I did actually enjoy. I thought it was pretty smart, and again, made the flashbacks make a lot more sense as you go through the story. So I enjoyed this one, but I think a lot of, again, people's negative reviews really come down to expectations. If you're looking for the best meta horror book of the year, I don't think you're going to get that. But if you're looking for a coming of age story that is going to address anxiety, and you just love books that have references to your favorite horror movies like Halloween, this one might appeal to you as long as, again, you keep your expectations in check. I thought it was good. So I liked it, and I would recommend it cautiously to you all. Next up, let's talk about Ghost Station by S.A. Barnes. This is a space horror that follows a crew that are going off to investigate this ancient planet. They go with the psychologist who is there specifically because there is known to be this psychological breakdown that often happens in space that they specialize in. So they essentially are there to watch the crew and try to keep them sane. However, as you would expect, when they go to this planet, things start to go wrong and people start to have incidents. And so the story spirals from there. That is the basic premise of this book, which sounds amazing. However, I did go into this book with tepid expectations because of the fact that I was very disappointed by Dead Silence. Without spoiling the book too much, I actually generally enjoyed the plot of the first book that this author wrote, but what I didn't love was the ending, which I found to be a bit of a betrayal of the whole premise of the book once it was all laid out for the reader. And so I went cautiously with this one because I cannot say no to a sci-fi horror book. I love the subgenre despite the fact that I'm constantly disappointed by it, but I keep picking them up. And so I went to this one believing I was going to enjoy another story and wanting to see if the author could stick the landing. However, what I got surprised me, and that's the fact that I found this book incredibly boring. The premise that I told you is technically correct, but the actual execution, the narrative style of the book, the way it is told to the reader, I found to be so passive, focusing on details that I just did not find interesting or suspenseful, and I really failed to connect with this one. I was hoping it would give me vibes of movies like Alien and that whole franchise, but instead this book left me really not feeling much of anything. I don't have huge criticisms, particularly of the ending, only because I was so disinterested in the book along the way that there was no ending that could betray the book for me or could save it, because simply I had such a poor reading experience along the way. So maybe this author is just not for me. Again, it's so hard for me to say no to the opportunity to review space horror because it is something so near and dear to my heart. But because of that, I tend to be harsh on the subgenre because I think there's a way to do it right and a way to do it wrong. And unfortunately, this one falls in the latter category. And last, I read The City of Lies by Kelley Armstrong, and this is a story that follows a detective who years ago in college ended up killing a man, and this individual that she killed had a connection to the mob, and so she has always been on the run trying to hide from that past. She has a friend who is also on the run from an abusive husband, and so when their paths collide, they end up hearing about this place that they are able to go and escape and have a new life. So they end up getting a connection and going up north to the Yukon, where they discover this secret hidden town where people who have done bad things and are trying to hide out from the law and other individuals are all living there. They bring in specifically the detective to be a pseudo cop within the town, and from there, of course, there are more things going on, and so the story deals with them as they are dealing with the mysteries of the town. So this specifically is a series that I should have read before reading the 2 books in the Haven Rock series that I just talked about in my last horror and thriller wrap up. And I really appreciate everyone who pointed this out to me, because my only complaint with that series was the fact that it felt like I was starting in the middle and they kept referencing things that had happened within the story that I hadn't read. And so I thought the author was just going crazy with prologue to the book and kind of talking about flashbacks to things that happened before the book started. Thankfully, quite a few people point out to me that there actually is the original series, and what I was reading before was a companion spin-off series. So anyway, if you're going to check out this series or that series, I do recommend starting back at the beginning. I really enjoy Kelley Armstrong as a writer. I think she's just a great storyteller. I've read a few of her series now, and I just find that she is great at writing really interesting characters that I immediately care about, fast action plots that move along at a good narrative pace, exciting twists and turns, and always a little bit of romance, which I think she does well and balances so that it never feels like too much of the plot and ends up actually working quite well for me. So I really enjoy. I've only read the first book in this series so far, but I intend to binge through the rest very quickly. So let me know if you want me to do updates as I go along with the rest of the series, because I'm loving it so far. And Kelley Armstrong definitely has favorite author potential, and she's Canadian, so we know that always gives her bonus points, right? So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And I realized that I had more negative opinions than positive ones. So if you have new release horror and thriller books that you think I should go check out, please let me know, because at the end of the year, I'm supposed to put together a list of favorites. And let's say that the list is pretty slim right now, so I do need some help and inspiration. I gotta go. I think I got people calling me, but if you want to like, subscribe, and all those good things, I appreciate that. If you want to give me a thumbs up, if you want to drop a comment, even if it's just an emoji, lets me know you're here. Don't forget to hit that little notification bell and you'll never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.